Hey, folks, this is Mike with Battles of the First World War podcast. Joining us today is Bill Mills, author of the book Agent of the Iron Cross, The Race to Capture German Saboteur-Assassin Lothar Witzke during World War I. Okay, from the back of the book. On January 30th, 1918, Lothar Witzke, the most dangerous German agent in the Western Hemisphere, reached his destination, the U.S. border crossing at Nogales, Arizona. His mission: to destroy American defense plans, assassinate officials, organize strikes in critical industries, and at a time of intense racial unrest, to incite an insurrection among the Southern black citizenry. Within days, the campaign of terror would begin. The Witzke mission was the intelligence game played at its highest level, a plan for destruction on a massive scale, violent insurrection and assassination, complete with master spies and double agents, diabolical sabotage devices, secret codes, and invisible ink. Meticulously researched and written in the style of an adventure novel, Agent of the Iron Cross is the first detailed account of this legendary espionage operation. Really excited to get into this book today with you, sir. So, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. This is great, Mike.
You've written several other books as well, all on events that occurred during the First World War or in the decade after it. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what has sparked your interest in World War I and this particular lesser-known aspect of World War I?
Sure. I have a BA in history, and my particular expertise has been First World War espionage and covert operations of the early 20th century. Many years ago, I read all the popular books that were available on the subject. I collected period books. I started collecting original documents and photographs from the period, and eventually, when I learned about some of the lesser known aspects of this, I decided to write my own books. And I have written 4 books on World War I espionage and also espionage into the 1920s. The reason I concentrated on World War I espionage, or at least my interest in World War I espionage has been so great, is a couple of things. First of all, a lot of people don't know about it. I mean, there's a lot of things have been written about World War II and the Cold War, not so much about World War I. And it was a really amazing period. I mean, when you look at what was going on, I mean, there was sabotage operations being run by the Germans and Austrians across the United States during World War I. There was economic warfare in which commodities were being purchased to try to deny them to the other warring powers. There were biological warfare operations going on where teams of agents were sent out to inject horses and cattle with bacteria to try to prevent them from being shipped over to Europe, and political warfare aimed at swaying public opinion about the war. At the same time, there were amazing advances in technology during the period. I mean, we think of World War I. I think when most people think of World War I, they think of 4 years of trench warfare and the big battles of the Somme and Verdun. But it really was a global war with across multiple theaters. And in terms of espionage, we think of it as kind of an antiquated period. But the Germans developed like tiny glass tube incendiaries that they were able to put into pencils to sabotage things. There were huge advances in invisible inks. I mean, only in 2011 did the CIA declassify the World War I secret ink formulas that they had. They were using mail drops and dead drops and cover identities and very sophisticated movement of money to pay agents. All the types of things were advanced during that period that are still happening today.
The little pencil things that the Germans created, well, they fit inside pencils rather. They were these glass tubes that would break and then or they would form some sort of chemical reaction inside, and they were basically on the spot incendiary agents, and you could leave them and start fires with them. I mean, that's amazing. And what you just said about the CIA just declassifying invisible ink recipes. I mean, that's wow. That's how serious this is, folks. Like, it's only in 2011. Wow.
Right. Almost 100 years after the war. Yeah.
Writing these stories, many of which have been forgotten How did you first hear of Lothar Witzke and his story? And can you tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. Well, a spy master from World War One, a British spy master. His name was Captain Henry Landau, and he ran operations from Holland into Belgium during World War One. And he wrote several books on World War One espionage after the war. And one of his books was a seminal work on World War One espionage that was called The Enemy Within. And it talks all about sabotage in the United States during the period. And it was one of the first works on it. And in his book, he included about 3 pages on the Witzke mission. And no one, until my book, Agents of the Iron Cross, no one has written a detailed account of fully what happened during the period. But there have been several brief mentions of the Witzke mission. Now, what the Witzke mission was, Lothar Witzke was a 19-year-old naval cadet in the German Navy. And when the war broke out, he had been assigned to this cruiser called the Dresden that was involved in the Battle of the Falklands, where, of course, a British squadron destroyed 4 German cruisers. And the Dresden that Witzke was on was able to escape. And it kind of hid out in the channels and waterways of Chile for months. And then it was eventually sunk off an island off of Chile. And Witzke was injured during that engagement. And along with the other crew members, the German crew members from the Dresden, they were captured by the British and interned in Chile. Now, because Witzke was injured, he had received a shrapnel wound to his knee. He was put in a hospital, and he was able to, because people figured he couldn't move around, he was able to escape from the hospital. He went on board a British steamship called the Calusa, and posing as a Dane because he looked very Danish, and he signed on as a crew member. And the Calusa went to San Francisco. And when Witzke landed in San Francisco, he went to the German consulate and wanted to get back to Germany to get back in the war again. But because of the German naval blockade of Germany, it was very difficult for any German servicemen or reservists to make it back to Germany. Yep. So he took a job for the consul delivering mail within the United States, and he got kind of bored with that. And eventually he was put in touch with a person named Kurt Janke, who had been doing secret missions for the German consulate in San Francisco. And together, Janke and Witzke become a devastating sabotage team, responsible for some of the biggest sabotage incidents of the First World War. But what the book is about primarily is about a mission that Witzke gets sent on in 1918, where the German intelligence has sent him to the United States, as I mentioned as you read from the back of the book, to basically launch a terror campaign in the United States. Destroying factories, raising an insurrection. And one of the tasks that he was given was to murder in cold blood a U.S. intelligence officer named Byron Butcher. And this will be, the Germans, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute, but the Germans at this stage of the war were trying to do what they could to divert American attention from Europe and to stop American troops from going overseas. So Witzke's terror mission in the United States is intended to create disorder and chaos along the southern border and help to prevent American troops from going overseas.
Sure. I mean, had they been successful in getting that insurrection going that they wanted to with the African American population down south, of course that would have created a lot of unrest that definitely would have diverted many U.S. forces who would be forced to stay home and just either deal with that situation, depending how big it got, or probably just delay them enough to maybe Germany would have had a shot at winning their 1918 battles over in France. So amazing.
Well, German intelligence really knew what was going on in the United States, and the person that Witzke worked for, Janke, really understood the American psyche. He was a naturalized American. He had lived here for over a decade, and he really understood what was going on. Now, during World War I, there was terrible racial unrest in the United States and terrible incidents that occurred.
Right.
There were riots in East St. Louis, Illinois, in Chester, Pennsylvania, in which hundreds of people hundreds of black citizens were killed and homes destroyed. I mean, in 1918, there were 64 recorded black lynchings of citizens in the United States. It was a terrible period, and the Germans hoped to build on this by actually increasing the unrest that was occurring during the period and take advantage of it for the war effort.
This also brings to mind they really knew what was going on, because they over in France, I remember when I was doing the episode on the 92nd African American Division, German planes would drop leaflets over the African American troops saying, like, what exactly are you fighting for? Like, who's democracy? Like, you don't live in a democracy. You don't get to enjoy the benefits of it. Like, why not, in Germany, like, we treat you pretty good, man. Why not come over to our side? So definitely a lot of intel was probably getting back to Germany, and it's like, hey, this could be a potential weak spot right here where we could get some defectors. Amazing that all of this was going on in the world. This is like I said before we started recording, and like you mentioned, like, I grew up during the Cold War, the last decade of the Cold War. So I think of spy stuff. I typically think of, cloak and dagger with Soviet agents and stuff like that. But and then before that, it's like, the intrigue with like Nazi spies and kind of like Indiana Jones stuff. But it goes back even further. Like, this is really a whole amazing story. If I can digress a little bit, Bill, this Kurt Jahnke, he's a bit of a character. What was his thing? And I know this doesn't pertain much to the story, but this just really sticks with me, is when he would speak with his eyes closed. He had this like weird mannerism.
Yeah, that was one of his unusual characteristics, that when he'd talk to people and lecture them, he'd close his eyes, and then it'd open them to see how people were reacting to what he was saying. He was kind of an amazing. I find him to be really an amazing character, and he was one of the major figures in terms of World War I espionage. And very little has been written about him. It's kind of surprising. He came to the United States in the late 1890s. In 1909, he joined the Marine Corps and was in the Marine Corps for a year. Then he joined the Customs Service and learned about smuggling. And after he learned about smuggling, he became a professional smuggler. And after that, partly as an alibi for his sabotage activities, he joined something called the Morse Patrol, which was kind of like a guard patrol on the West Coast.
Okay.
And he joined it both so that if he was doing something and asked somebody spotted him doing something, he could say, I'm working on work for the Morse Patrol. But he also could use it as an alibi, because other people could work in his place while he was actually doing things. And he could say, oh, I was at work that day, but he really wasn't. But he becomes working again for the German consulate in San Francisco. He becomes a master saboteur, and both he and Witzke range across the United States. They're not just on the West Coast. They're doing things on the West Coast, but everywhere where there were defense plants in the United States where they wanted to stop this equipment from going overseas, for the British, the French, the Russians, they were engaging in sabotage activity. So he really is a fascinating character, and not a lot has been written about him.
Yeah, he sounds like a really savvy, really sharp guy. My next question here is actually on the research, but I'm going to hold off on this for a little bit because we're kind of rolling right into it. So Jahnke and Lothar Witzke, what are some of the acts of sabotage that they claimed credit for, and what was his base of operations?
Sure. Well, again, because these acts of sabotage were so carefully planned with alibis and red herrings in advance, there's not a lot of proof as to. I mean, you couldn't say 100% someone did this act, because they left so few clues.
Right.
But they were involved in dozens of sabotage acts across the United States. And Witzke would claim, and again, this was at a time when a German officer's word was his bond. And I mean, it was people believed in honor, and if you said something, it had to be true. And he said this in front of other agents who were in communication with Yankee, so they would know that he had done at least 3 major sabotage acts in the United States. He destroyed the boilers on a huge cargo ship called the SS Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
He took part in the destruction of Black Tom Island, the huge munitions transfer station in New York Harbor. And lastly, after the war began, that he took part in Mare Island on the Pacific coast. There was a very large naval station that he took part in the destruction of a black powder magazine that contained 160,000 pounds of black powder on Mare Island that caused it to blow up. But each of these incidents were just huge in terms of what he claimed that he did. The SS Minnesota was, when it was launched in 1903, it was the largest cargo liner in the world, and it had been operating on the west coast of the United States between Washington and Yokohama, Japan. But because of changes in U.S. law, the company that owned it would have to move it to the East Coast, and it would engage in trade between the United States and Great Britain. Well, you can imagine this huge cargo ship that can carry more cargo than any other ship afloat. It was going to not only be used for provisions that would support Britain during World War I, but also carry ammunition and explosives. So Witzke claimed that he got on the ship and he destroyed the boilers. An investigation by what was then now it's the FBI, at the time it was the Bureau of Investigation, could not prove beyond any doubt that sabotage had taken place, and there were no witnesses. Again, false clues and alibis were left that they followed up on that led nowhere. And so they eventually had to give up, and this huge cargo ship, the Minnesota, was in San Francisco being repaired and dry docked for over a year instead of carrying supplies over to Britain. Now, I think most people who are knowledgeable about World War I have heard about the Black Tom explosion.
Right.
And Black Tom was a large, it was kind of a transit point for munitions going over to Europe. Munitions at that time, because of the tremendous money that could be made, and it was being manufactured at plants across the United States, DuPont plants and other chemical companies, and the explosives and ammunition was all being taken by train to the Black Tom station, where it would be taken off the train, get loaded onto lighters or barges, and then taken over to the steamships that would carry it over to Europe and further on to Russia. Well, Witzke and Yankee sailed in a rowboat one night onto Black Tom, together with an Austrian immigrant named Michael Christoph, who came from the land. And they left some of the pencil incendiaries that we talked about, those small glass incendiaries, on a barge containing a tremendous amount of TNT and fuses. And in the case of Christoph, in a freight car that had a large amount of TNT. And shortly after midnight, I think it was July 30th, 1916, the Black Tom arsenal blew up. There were two initial explosions that were felt as far away as Pennsylvania, 158 miles away. And then over the course of the night and into the next day, there was still ammunition blowing up the next morning. They blew up the entire station, and it contained 2.3 million pounds of explosives. Now, sometimes you see pictures of Black Tom where you can see them trying to collect ammunition artillery ammunition that had exploded, and it makes you think there was a lot of ammunition there. But it was really explosives: picric acid, TNT, smokeless powder, black powder. Basically a 2.3 million pound bomb that was set off primarily by Yankee and Witzke. And the last thing I think I already mentioned was the Mare Island explosion, where Mare Island was a large naval base where, aside from building ships, they had a shipbuilding yard. It also was where ships went to be serviced and maintained. And when they were being maintained, they would exchange the explosives and the artillery ammunition to make sure that the U.S. Navy had fresh ammunition. So they had a very large ammunition magazine at this base with 12 or 14 very large storehouses containing everything from black powder to nitroglycerin. And Witzke claimed that he set off the Mare Island explosion in which 160,000 pounds of black powder went off. They hoped to blow up the entire magazine, which would have really been catastrophic. But through the work of sailors and Marines on the base, they were able to take nitroglycerin out of warehouses that were on fire and all sorts of heroic acts. They were able to just make it a single storehouse that was blown up. But those are three of the major incidents that they did. But many incidents that we're sure that they would have been involved in, no one will ever know about.
Now, Black Tom Island today, I recently looked it up on Google Maps. It appears to be it's a pretty much a park, and it's a good vantage point for you to see New York Harbor. I believe you can see the Statue of Liberty right from there. So Black Tom Island and Mare Island, are there any markers or any sort of memorials to what happened there that you know of, Bill?
Yeah, there is, like you mentioned, there is a marker and a memorial. I think it's called Battery Park or Liberty Park, where the Black Tom explosion took place. There is a little memorial there. There's also, I believe, a memorial on Mare Island because there were 6 people who were killed on Mare Island, most from a family,
right.
And 31 people were injured. But for that family they lived very close to the ammunition magazine that was killed, there is a marker there as well.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Going back to our guy, Lothar Witzke, how did he come to the attention of U.S. authorities?
Well, as we discussed, by this point, I think most of your listeners are very familiar with World War I. I mean, it's January 1918, and the German army, the German people are really war weary after 3.5 years of war. They're starving because of the German naval blockade in 1916 and 1917. Food riots have broken out in Germany. Basically, the country is on the verge of social collapse. But the previous month, in December 1917, the new Bolshevik government of Vladimir Lenin has signed an armistice with the Germans, which allowed the Germans to move 40 divisions to the Western Front. And for the first time since the war began in January 1918, they now have more men on the battlefield than both the French and the British combined. Not a tremendous amount more, maybe like 5 or 7%, but now for the first time since 1914, there's a really good chance that they could win the war. But they want to, as we said, divert American troops from going over to Europe. So their hope is they started training camps for German reservists and Mexican conscripts in northern Mexico. And there were one camp was at this place called El Claro, which is very close. It's in the state of Sonora, very close to the U.S. border with Mexico. And 2 other smaller camps. And they hoped to they said invade, but really it was more of like a diversionary attack. Somewhere along the border with the United States, they would create kind of a phony invasion that, combined with what Witzke was doing, would again divert American attention from Europe. The United States would move troops down to the Mexican border, move National Guardsmen down to the Mexican border, just as occurred when Pancho Villa raided Columbus, New Mexico, a year or so before that, when the United States, we sent the expeditionary force, the punitive expedition into Mexico, 6,600 men, and we also moved the entire United States National Guard to the border with Mexico. They hoped something like that would happen. So the United States government, and at this time, there were a number of different police forces that were investigating German activity after we entered the war in 1917. One is the Bureau of Investigation. One is also U.S. Army military intelligence that was carrying on counterintelligence activity, both in other countries like in Mexico and also in the United States at that time, monitoring activity in the United States. So U.S. Army military intelligence penetrates the German espionage establishment, which is now established in Mexico City. And they have agents in the German intelligence. And they were able to track Lothar Witzke as he's moving toward the border. And by the time he reaches the border, he's under 24-hour surveillance by U.S. Army military intelligence. So when he goes across, again, as part of what he was doing, he was recruiting at the time. He would be captured. He was recruiting saboteurs. He was obtaining kind of propaganda material to try to worsen relations with the black community in the United States. He was doing things like that. He went across the border to deposit over $1,000 in a bank in Nogales, Arizona, and at that point he is arrested.
All right. Before we get to that arrest, we've mentioned Kurt Janke. Earlier you mentioned, I believe it was Michael Christoph, an Austro-Hungarian spy.
Yes.
Who are some of the other people in Witzke's world and the circles that he moved in?
Sure. Well, at points I won't get too far into detail because there's a lot of surprises in this story, and I don't want to destroy it for anyone.
Right.
But Kurt. I mean, of course, there's Kurt Janke, who he's working for, a master saboteur and spy master. Witzke at that time knew most of the German saboteurs who were engaged in sabotage activity in the United States during the pre-war period. There were people. There was a German-American named Fred Herman who was involved. There were a person named in Mexico, Paul Bernardo Altendorf, who was an Austrian doctor who was also hired by the Germans as an agent. There was an agent working for the Germans named William Gleaves, who actually was a black agent working for the Germans hired by the Germans during World War I. So he knew most of the spies and saboteurs that were operating in the United States.
Wow, amazing! And I've got here. My question was like, how was it discovered that Witzke was indeed a German spy and not Pablo Bobersky, a Russian sailor? I think we've alluded to that. But maybe so this mission that he's on in early 1918, he is. Can you walk us through without giving away too much, but walk us into how he's captured and the damning evidence that got him?
Sure. Well, in January 1918, Witzke and two associates, Altendorf and Gleaves, are sent on a mission to the U.S. border, and they'll be going from Mexico City across central Mexico to the west coast of Mexico, travel by boat to Mazatlan on the coast of Mexico, and up through the state of Sonora to Nogales, Sonora. And it's a long distance. It's like 1,550 miles. It's like if you imagine a trip from, and this is in 1918, a trip from Boston to Miami. It's a long distance over really rugged territory.
Right.
And they have a number of different adventures along the way. There's I won't go into tremendous detail, but when they get there, again, he is going to be depositing money in a bank account and will be arrested. But it's amazing in terms of at one point they're attacked by bandits. At another point, there's a chance that they might be doing a sabotage activity in Mexico. They meet with a person in the state of Sonora named Plutarco Ilias Calles, and Calles was a major figure of the Mexican Revolution. He gives Witzke the revolver, the Smith & Wesson revolver that he was instructed to use to kill Byron Butcher. And you'll see what happens in the story. But Calles later becomes president of Mexico. So it's an amazing story with really amazing characters.
Yeah. So you have World War I. You've got the Mexican Revolution and everything. All of these figures, what a stew of intrigue and everything happening in this part of the world. Amazing. Okay. Yeah. So I think now's the point. I do want to ask one thing more about Witzke, but I'm going to hold off. So part of what fascinated me about reading this, Bill, was I just kept thinking about what kind of research did you have to do for this story? I know we've talked a lot about the subject matter. and I that's usually what I do when I cover books here on the podcast. But I'd like to give you some recognition for the work that you had to have put into this. So can you tell us a little bit about like once you decided like, man, there's a story here on this guy Lothar Witzke, and I'm going to dig into this. Like, what did you have to do to dig in?
What's interesting, the actual writing of a book is really not that difficult. The most difficult thing is to find a story that is interesting, that an audience of readers would find interesting, that you find interesting enough that you'd want to write about it, and that no one has written before.
Mm-hmm.
And then a story like that you can find enough research material that you can tell the story in detail. And I've written a number of books, and each time that's really the most difficult thing. Sometimes I'll go through maybe 5 or 6 different story ideas before I hit on the one that I can actually really write about and tell the story in detail. I don't want to tell it, something at a very high level. I'd really like to be able to have a lot of first and second person dialogue and really have the reader down on the ground level watching what's going on. So again, finding the story and then finding one that you can find material on, because many times I'll find a story and then I go to research it and there's nothing there. The people are all dead. Nothing was written down. It's a really great story, but you can't make these things up. Everything has to be true. So it makes it very difficult. In this case, I was very fortunate because this Witzke mission is one of the least known episodes of the First World War, but at the same time, it's probably one of the best documented. And the reason why it's one of the best documented is because after Witzke gets captured, he's tried under an army court-martial, and their army court-martial records. And the Army court-martial records will also be used by investigators after World War I who are investigating the Black Tom incident. And we won't go into too much detail. There's something called the Mixed Claim Commission after the war, where the Germany and the United States set up this panel of judges for incidents where property was destroyed outside of military standard war action, like during the neutrality period during World War I, mm-hmm. when if a German saboteur blew up a plant in the United States, that's really not a war act. And the German government would be required to pay damages for what had occurred. And the same thing for any incidents that the United States had done during that period. So there was a mixed claim commission set up where hundreds and hundreds of different things that had occurred where destruction had happened was adjudicated, and people were paid damages. Now, the two of the biggest sabotage incidents that occurred during World War I were Black Tom and also the Kingsland explosion, the Canadian Car and Foundry plant, artillery plant explosion in New Jersey. And those cases, which were in tens of millions of dollars, the German government really didn't want to pay and admit to. So those cases went on for 20 years. So in the course of gathering information to prove that German agents had committed these acts, the investigators were using Witzke and Janke as examples of German agents who had taken part in these activities. So they got the court-martial records from the Witzke court-martial. They took depositions from a score of people that all sort of played into this mission. So I was very fortunate that I was able to, at a used bookshop, get a hold of a set of bound claimants exhibits from this investigation of the Black Tom explosion, and it included the full trial record of the Lothar Witzke trial, as well as depositions from people who had taken part in it. Altendorf, the spy we talked about, Gleaves, who we talked about. A number of different agents. So all this material was there and made writing the book a lot easier. I still had to go to libraries and archives and foundations across the United States to get additional material to flush it out. But the main core of it came from the Mixed Claim Commission records that I was able to obtain.
So I've got one follow-up question for you is kind of going back to the CIA declassifying the invisible ink recipes. Like, did you yourself come up against any like locked or barred doors or any files like, yeah, you don't have access to that, sir? Anything like that?
No, it's really great about writing. One of the things that are great about writing about World War One espionage is you really don't come up. It was so long ago, you really don't come up against that. If you wrote about espionage starting in about the 1940s into the 1950s, you'll find a lot of material that's still classified. Sometimes you get records and they've been so redacted. There's so many blacked out marks in there, taking out names and things that you really can't make any sense out of it. So one of the great things about World War One espionage is writing about it is that so much material is there and it's not really classified.
Oh, amazing. I suspect that's right because everybody who's involved is now passed on, and anybody who could be affected by it has also passed on in the time since. So it's not that bad. Amazing. So again, not giving away too much detail. Does the story end with Witzke's arrest and conviction by court-martial, Bill?
No, it doesn't.
That's cool.
He is. I think many people you can just see online. He was found guilty. He was the only American spy captured during World War One to be sentenced to death. While he is in prison in Texas, he managed to escape from the prison, and I won't say what happens then, but he does. He actually escapes from prison. After the war, his sentence is commuted by President Wilson to life imprisonment at hard labor. And then he is pardoned 3 years later by Coolidge under the understanding that he will leave the United States and never return. Mm-hmm. And he goes to Europe and he joins something called the Black Reichswehr, which is an army that was set up in defiance of the Versailles Treaty, a secret army. He works a little while, 6 months, for his boss during World War I, Yankee. And then throughout the 1930s and 1940s, he's a member of the Abwehr, German military intelligence as an agent, sending agents and saboteurs into England from France during World War I. Yankee, after the war, 6 months after the war, he makes it back to Germany. He continues in intelligence. He starts his own private intelligence group. He actually joined the Prussian Diet. He becomes a politician. It's kind of the equivalent of a congressman or senator in the United States for 2 years, which is kind of funny in the state of Prussia. And then after the war, into the 1930s, he becomes allied with the Nazis, and he becomes a senior advisor on foreign intelligence to Reinhard Heydrich and his immediate boss, Schellenberg, and also Heinrich Himmler. And he engages in secret missions for the Nazis during World War II. Now, at the end of the war, he was living in an estate in Pomerania, and he just disappears. And for a long time, no one knew what happened to him. He was just gone. They assumed he had been captured by the Russians. And very recently, over the past year, records have come out that he was captured by the Russians at the end of the war, taken to Moscow. And for years, they worked on getting information out of him because he had a worldwide network of agents that the Soviets could use. And in 1950, he was executed in Moscow.
Wow. Wow, what an end. Wow. Folks, the book is Agent of the Iron Cross, The Race to Capture German Saboteur-Assassin Lothar Witzke During World War I. Links to it will be provided in the episode notes. And don't forget, buy the book at your local bookseller if you would, please. All right. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's really been great. And I really enjoyed discussing World War I espionage with you.
Awesome. Thank you.